An explosion has brought devastation to the center of the Turkish city of Istanbul.
The blast happened in the center of the city. At least 6 people were killed and more than 80 others injured.
This explosion occurred at 4:20 p.m. local time in the center of Istiklal Avenue.
It appears to be a terrorist attack.
It was an explosion that tore families apart on what should have been an otherwise uneventful day on November 13th. 6 people were killed by a bomb that was placed in the middle of Istiklal Avenue in Turkey's largest city, Istanbul, at a time when it was packed with shoppers and families. The likely culprit was a terror group little understood by many in the West, but all too familiar for a country that has been locked in a bitter 4-decade battle against it. The terror attack inevitably is intertwined with the complex geopolitics of the region. Though far from the battlefields of Syria and the lawless remote mountains of northern Iraq, Istanbul has become a target for extremists over the years who have tried, but failed, to bring the city to its knees. Nonetheless, the human toll is real. The victims of terror on Istiklal on November 13th had their whole lives ahead of them, and surviving family members were determined to tell their story and keep their memory alive. And so we traveled deep into the Asian side of Istanbul to speak with Nurettin, the father of one of the victims, 15-year-old Yaghmor, who was killed alongside her mother Arzu in the Istiklal bombing. Yaghmor translates to rain in English, and it was on a rainy Istanbul evening that Nurettin, despite the anguish and shock, agreed to sit down with us.
Yani düşünün, bir gün önce konuştuğunuz çocuğunuzun bir gün sonra böyle bir patlamada hayatını kaybettiğini öğreniyorsunuz. İçinizden tabii o anda inanmak gelmiyor. Her ne kadar bunun gerçek olduğunu duysanız da, işitsiniz de siz yürekten inanamıyorsunuz, inanmak istemiyorsunuz. Çok zor bir olaydı yani. Böyle bir düşünceye hiç sahip olmadım yani. Böyle bir şeyden korkum yoktu yani. Hani bir yerde bomba patlayacak yani. Bizi mi bulur yani böyle bir şey falan gibi, böyle hiçbir şey düşünmedim. Çünkü biz o an, o günün tadını çıkarmaya, o gün birlikte nasıl eğlenebiliriz, onların hesabını yapıyorduk. Neşe içerisinde böyle şen şakrak bir gün geçirdik Yağmur'la beraber.
Gel ona vur şimdi. Tersine. Hop.
Benim yanımda olduğunda Yağmur'un başka bir dünyası yoktu. Benim de onun yanında olduğum zamanlarda ikimizin dünyası birleşiyordu yani. İkimizin için başka bir dünya oluyor. Farklı bir dünya oluyor. Korkusuz, korkmadan. O gün İstiklal'e gitmelerindeki sebep, daha önce de sürekli oraya gidiyorlardı. Ve bir ara tatil olmuştu Türkiye'de. Okullar bir hafta böyle bir ara tatile girmişlerdi. O gün de annesi de zaten öğretmen, Yağmur'un annesi de öğretmendi. Pazar günü bir Taksim'de çok kalabalık olduğundan dolayı böyle eğlenme maksatlı oraya gidiyorlar. Hem alışveriş yaparız, hem mağazaları gezeriz. Çünkü mağazaları gezmeyi çok seviyordu Yağmur. Yoğun bir hafta geçirmişti Yağmur. 2 hafta sınavlar vardı. Sınavları tamamlamıştı. Cuma günü görüştüğümüzde, olaydan bir gün öncesinde. Sınavlarım bitti baba. Başarılı bir sınav haftası geçirdim dedi. Cuma günü söylemişti bana, annemle gezmeye gideceğiz diye. Ben de ona küçük bir harçlık göndermiştim yani. Harcayamadan gitti benim kızım yani. Benim çocuğumla beraber orada başka bir çocuk daha hayatını kaybetti. Yine orada başka canlar da hayatlarını kaybettiler. Yani bir insan öldürüyorsunuz, bütün insanlığı öldürmüş gibi bir duyguya sahip oluyorum yani bir kişi öldürüldüğü zaman. Yani benim kızım orada öldürüldü ama ben bir baba olarak onu yüreğimde acısını hissediyorum, yüreğimde taşıyorum. Kanatsız bir melekti, şimdi kanatlı bir melek oldu. Beni teselli eden bu. Ben kızımın cennette olduğunu, ben de öldükten sonra elimden tutup beni yanına götüreceğine inanıyorum.
What would you like the world to remember about your daughter?
Yaşama sevinci olan bir insanın yaşamasını söndürmesi, hayata bakışını, hayata hazırlanışını söndürdüler bir eylem sonucunda. Yağmur çok farklı bir çocuktu. Yani değişken hayalleri vardı. Yani böyle gördüğü şeylere yani özenen değil de böyle gördüğü şeylerde doğruyu arayan, doğru seçenekleri eleyen bir çocuktu. Yanlışları, doğruları eleyen bir çocuktu. İstiklal Caddesi'nde gezmeyi çok severdi. Her geldiğimde onu oraya götürürdüm. Orada gezmeyi. Tırlıçı, tatlı sevmeyi çok severdi.
From Istanbul, we went to the southern Turkish city of Adana, nestled between the Taurus Mountains and the Mediterranean, where we met with Mevludiye Meydan. She lost her husband Yusuf and 9-year-old daughter Ejrin in the same bombing. They were all in Istanbul for Yusuf's younger brother's engagement party. We're walking down Istiklal with Ejrin. Mevludiye was holding the hands of her loved ones 1 second, and in the next, Ejrin and Yusuf were no more. Only she and her 5-year-old daughter Derin survived. A day that started off with joy had ended in horror.
Benim küçük masum bebeğime ne yaptıklarını görsünler istiyorum. Saçları ipek gibiydi benim kızımın. Ben dokunmaya kıyamazdım, toprağa koydum. Ben dokunmaya kıyamazdım çocuğuma. Toprağa koydum ben yavrumu. Çok zor, yemin ediyorum çok zor bir anne için. Bir anne için çok zor. Bana yapabilecekleri en büyük kötülük buydu. Daha bundan fazlası olamaz. İstanbul'a geliş sebebimiz Yusuf'un erkek kardeşinin hem istemesi, aynı anda da yüzük takılacaktı. Onun için gelmiştik. Öyle çok güzel bir gün geçirdik. Çok iyi insanlarla karşılaştık. Ecrin o gün çok mutluydu. Yengesini çok sevdi. Bir sonraki günde zaten gidecektik. Planımız öyleydi. Ama Ecrin, anne siz gezdiniz, ben de gezeceğim dedi. Biz ilk gün, cuma günü akşamüstü gezmiştik çünkü Yusuf'la biraz. Ecrin doya doya gezemedi ama. Kedileri sevebildi. O kadar. Ama morgun önünde kedi vardı. Uçağın önünde kedi vardı. Mezarlığında kedi vardı. Hep kedi vardı yani. Hep o sevdiği kediler yanındaydı. Güzel bebeğim. Şimdi cennette kedilerle oynuyordur. Resim de yapıyordur bol bol. Resim yapmayı çok severdi çünkü. Çok severdi resim yapmayı. Yusuf da çok iyi bir babaydı ama o da çok iyi bir babaydı. Bir bilseler, o sokakta diyorum ya, o sokakta katledebilecekleri en masum insanı, 2 insanı öldürdüler. En masum. Hiçbir şeyden haberleri yoktu. Hiçbir şeyden. Sadece yürüyorduk. 3'ümüz sadece yürüyorduk. Hiçbir şey yapmadık kimseye. Sadece yürüdük. Yusuf o kadar sabırlı ki bizde her şeyi o yapardı. İkisi beraber saatlerce uğraştılar. Bunun etrafı doluydu. Bahçe yapmıştı babası. Oturacak yerlerinden havuzuna kadar her şeyini yapmıştı bu maketin. Bu bizim evimizi temsil ediyor derdi. Bu bizim hayalimizdeki ev. Bitti. Her şey yerle bir. Pembeye boyayacaklardı daha o evi. Bizim evimiz çünkü pembe olmalıydı. Benim kızlarım pembeyi çok severdi. Babası dedi ki pembeye de boyarım, sen merak etme dedi. Pembeye boyarız evimizi. Nasip olmadı. Artık cennette çok güzel bir ev yapacağız. Dışı da pembe olacak.
The Meydans were a prototypical young family who shared the aspirations of so many others. And to get to the heart of why the bomb was planted in the heart of Istanbul that day, we went back to Istiklal.
Istiklal is a cosmopolitan street full of life. Its name translates to independence. Formerly known as the Grande Rue de Pera, this is home to some of the city's most vibrant areas. Shops, restaurants, bars, churches, mosques, local tea houses, as well as various consulates. The street was badly hit in a previous wave of terror attacks in 2015 and 2016, but that did not deter Turkish families, as well as tourists, from coming back. The bombing on November 13th took place on a crowded afternoon, much like this one, with previous attacks becoming a distant memory at the time. At least for now, with the blood washed away and the victims mourned, life is returning to some semblance of normalcy, and with the calls for retribution growing.
Turkish security officials believe the bombing was conducted by the PKK, a designated terror group that has been waging war against Turkey and killing tens of thousands of civilians in the process for the past 4 decades. The hardcore leadership of the PKK is believed to be operating out of an underground base in the Kandil Mountains in northern Iraq, while the affiliated Syrian branch of the PKK, known as the YPG, is believed to have given the orders for the bombing. They control this area in northern Syria and Yellow. From there, the YPG has also launched a number of rocket attacks against Turkish border towns. The Turkish armed forces have responded with a mass barrage of artillery and airstrikes throughout northern Syria. But it's not likely to end there. I sat down with Murat Yeşiltaş, a prominent Turkish defense expert, to better understand the ongoing conflict.
Walk us through where the order was given to place a bomb in Istiklal.
There is a strong connection between PKK and YPG within the context of the, this terrorist attack. Yes, I mean the PKK is the main actors, is the main terrorist organizations behind the terrorist attack. Probably PKK gave the order to conduct a terrorist attack against Turkey, inside Turkey. There was a statement made by so-called leader of PKK, Duran Kalkan. Duran Kalkan was talking about the, how PKK should respond against Turkey's military operation in Syria, in northern Iraq, and in Turkey. And he was mentioning that every member of the Kurdish society, according to him, should fight against with different tactics and methods in all cities within Turkey. I think this is a very strong signal that the PKK could take some sort of, terrorist activities within Turkey.
You have the PKK, you have the YPG, the US calls them the SDF. Help us understand a little bit the leadership structure here. You have the PKK in Kandil and the YPG in Syria. So how do those two connect, and how does that lead back to this bombing in Istiklal?
We can easily see that there are numbers of PKK who came from Kandil to join YPG in Syria. So this also shows us that there is an organizational direct connection between PKK and YPG. Without PKK's, some sort of permission, even YPG cannot do anything in Syria in terms of taking an initiative, military, political, and other initiative.
It was within that chain of command that the detained Istiklal bomber Ahlam al-Bashir, along with the ringleader of the plot, Bilal Hassan, who managed to escape, were connected.
PKK is a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist organizations, so they basically embrace all the aspect of this Marxist ideology. So they even believe that the democracy should be customized within the context of these ideological differences, and they therefore PKK create an amorphous ideology to justify so-called justification in the fighting against Turkey. They believe that this terrorist attack will bring some of the advantages to PKK in their fight, so-called fight against Turkey.
So Dr. Murat, why now? Why would the YPG choose this time to place a bomb in Istanbul after so many years? Why would they launch a terror attack of this type at this moment in time?
There are many reasons, but Turkey's drones activities on the ground in Syria is really important drivers for YPG's terrorist attack against Turkey. And of course, this is an interesting reasons for PKK, because PKK, PKK, I think, is desperate about this. Drone attacks, these special operations, this special intelligence operation is really important in terms of new counter-terrorism strategy of Turkey. It directly punished the PKK. It undermined PKK's organizational cohesion, which eventually affects PKK's long-term strategy.
The US says it still needs to partner with the YPG to fight the last remaining pockets of Daesh, also known as ISIS. While in northwest Syria, a Russian military base near the city of Tel Rifat offers the YPG safe haven in an area under the control of the regime of Bashar al-Assad. From there, the YPG has launched attacks against the Turkish military and Syrians living in opposition-held territory. Turkey is pressing the Russian military to abide by a previous agreement to push the YPG out of Tel Rifat. The YPG is viewed by Turkish authorities as posing an equal threat to that of the ISIS-Daesh terror group.
We saw this cooperation between YPG and ISIS in Afrin. YPG strategically released ISIS members in the prisons which were under control of YPG during the operation in Afrin. So we are seeing the same thing right now in Al Hol camp. YPG is again releasing or is threatening to release ISIS members because of Turkey's airstrike or Turkey's military operation in Syria.
The Al Hol camp in northeast Syria is technically under the guard of the YPG, with US forces close by. US Special Operations Command in 2016 rebranded the YPG under the name Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, to make it sound more acceptable for a wider audience.
They got to work on their own branding. So we literally played back to them that you got to change your brand. What do you want to call yourself besides the YPG? And with about a day's notice, they declared that they were the Syrian Democratic Forces.
Dutch researcher Rena Netjes has also extensively covered the YPG and researched its operations in Syria. She believes that the YPG has been rather successful in pushing disinformation regarding the real ideology and tactics.
So you see a pattern here between this attack, terror attack in Istanbul, and what you've seen in northern Syria.
It's the similar kind of attack, and such kind of attacks happen in northern Syria from SDF area on civilians many times, almost daily, even on IDP camps. I was there in October, that's 5-6 weeks ago, and when I was there also attacks happened, and we saw a few weeks ago also attack from SDF area on a market, on a shopping street in Azaz. 5 people got killed, IDPs by the way, and so for me this attack looked very much similar to all the attacks which happened there. We have enough attacks, more than enough, way too many attacks in northern Syria already to justify a military operation on Tel Rifat, already for years actually. Abdi promised the international crisis group 2 years ago, we don't need these foreign cadres, these foreign fighters. They started leaving. When I talked to Syrian courts, they said, no, this did not happen. So at the time, I thought it was quite a propaganda. I know personally quite some people who Syrian courts returned to Afrin after PKK was removed, because they're all on the hit list, so this different narrative is completely absent in Western media. If ISIS would be really defeated in Northeast, then the Americans could go home, because they are there because of the fight of ISIS, and Abdi needs the Americans, otherwise he'll be eaten probably by the regime and Russia. So they have something going on that ISIS should still be there, otherwise, they lose the support, the big support from the Americans.
The head of the YPG in Syria, Mazloum Abdi, is denied any responsibility, and he claimed that, hey, we're fighting ISIS only, we're not in the business of killing civilians. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a big lie. I know I know so many people, civilians, that were killed by them. That SDF, which is backed by the US, although in the Northwest they work very much with the Russians, but still, the US is not doing anything about it.
And planting bombs that kill children is not the group's only dark undercurrent.
children that are being kidnapped in the military camps. And the US knows. The US knows there's hundreds of minors in the military camps. And this for me, and not only for me, also for my government, the Dutch government, is enough to not be willing to support them. The US is pressing other governments, Western governments, to also support.
The conflict in Syria is not over by a long shot, and Turkish security interests will likely remain closely linked to what happens at its southern neighbor.
This used to be one of the most important cities in the ancient Near East. Carchemish has been settled almost continuously for a millennia. The armies of the Babylonian king fought his longtime rival, the Egyptian pharaoh, here, and the Romans built a city on this site that they called Europus. In 1920, on the formation of the Turkish Republic, the Turkish forces defeated the French military here. And fast forward nearly 100 years later, the Turkish army, alongside its Syrian partners, fought a battle in the Syrian city of Jarablus, right across the border wall here, where they defeated and expelled the terror group ISIS, also known as Daesh. But in this place, a different threat now faces the inhabitants of the city, who remain well within striking distance of the YPG's rockets.
Shallow tributaries of the Euphrates form the separating line and a de facto internal border between Turkish-backed opposition areas and YPG-held territory in Syria's northern plains. But beyond the brinkmanship, military preparations, and a global tug-of-war over these lands, what remains immeasurable is a father's grief and a mother's loss. The void left behind impossible to fathom, as they hope to find solace in their darkest hour.